I mean, when I saw these pictures so much, I thought, oh, goodness me, a terror attack on the Kremlin. Wow, this is extraordinary. And then you see these little puffs of smoke, little bit of fire. Videos helpfully, conveniently on the Kremlin. I imagine there is film footage of the Kremlin at all times. It's a major building in the world, you know, and obviously a tourist attraction in normal times as well. What do you make of these two drones hitting the Kremlin? And first of all, initially, what the Russians have claimed about them?
Well, you're not going to use drones to get probably one of the most protected individuals in the world. You're more protected than even the President of the United States, and he spends most of his time in bunkers, even if he is in the Kremlin. So, you know, small drone attacks are not going to be an assassination attempt. And then the airspace around the Kremlin is one of the most protected pieces of airspace in Europe. Now, small drones can get through air defence relatively easily, but what would the Ukrainians be trying to achieve, apart from to embarrass the Russians that they got something in there when it's the run-up to the 9th of May parades that they have?
This is the Victory Day parade next Tuesday. It'll be the second Victory Day. It's actually called Victory Day parade, but it's the second Victory Day that Vladimir Putin will be hosting without a victory.
So that's a possibility of embarrassment. But then the Russians came out with the drone piece and the footage. These security cameras were pointing in the air. They were pointing at the top of the drone. Security cameras tend to point down at the ground where people are and everything else, looking for threats. And it was from multiple angles as well, and very high quality imagery from the cameras. So
yes,
that suggests something dodgy. And the statement that Russia came out very quickly with was, you know, it was far too quick. It was far too exact in blaming the Ukrainians. So, you know, on the balance of probabilities, I'd say it's more likely a false flag attack for Putin to try and influence his people and influence a few decisions that he's got to make.
But this is the thing. I mean, that's what people immediately did think, didn't they? Now, President Zelensky, who's been visiting Helsinki, he said, you know, look, we don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our own territory, making it very clear. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, look, we simply don't know the source of the drone. He says, I would take anything coming out of the Kremlin with a very large shaker of salt. And White House said it was too early to confirm the accuracy of the Russian claims. But this is the thing, it wouldn't actually be in Ukrainian interests for them to do this, because, you know, again, be used as an excuse by Vladimir Putin for even more attacks, silly attacks on Kyiv. We know perfectly well. I mean, the expectation at the beginning of this war, way back when, it just seems a very long time ago now, was that they march into Kyiv, the president gets on a private jet and disappears out. That's what you know Vladimir Putin would do, and then it would all be over in a matter of days or weeks. And you know, he'd been desperate to kill President Zelensky, who's led these war efforts and has been such an inspiration to his people, and of course persuasive to Western governments and Western public as well in terms of getting support. So it would be absolutely insane for the Ukrainians to do this as either a propaganda tool or as a way of sort of goading the Russians when we're expecting the spring offensive and counter-offensive. But it is in the interest of Vladimir Putin and his people to use this as some sort of excuse for more assaults on Ukraine. But why does Vladimir Putin need to do that anyway? He can control all the media in Russia as it is. He's got a widespread Russian support because they're only seeing a one-sided story. Why would he even need to do this?
The Russians have got a tactic called Varanya, which is just lying. We saw that with the two individuals that visited Salisbury just to look at the fantastic spire.
It's an amazing spire.
Exactly, after the failed attack on Sergei Skripal. So it's something in the Russian psyche that's doing it. And Vladimir Putin may be using it to suggest that he needs more mobilization, that the Ukraine conflict is coming home to Moscow, that an excuse to scale down his 9th of May parades and suggest that there's too much of a threat after the assessment with these drones coming in. The nasty Ukrainians have forced us to scale this back, hiding the fact that he hasn't got the equipment or the troops to put on his usual big display.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah, I mean, that's because so much of this is about saving face for Vladimir Putin, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all about saving face, and you know, there's no way would President Zelensky want to kill Putin, because actually one of his best tactical assets whilst Russian troops are on the ground, because we've got the conflict between Prigozhin, head of the Wagner group, and Gerasimov, the military commander in overall charge. and you have got unity of command there. And then every now and again, Vladimir Putin comes in with what I describe as his long-handled screwdriver from Moscow, saying, forget about this tactic, do this, and I want you to do that. And that causes even more operational confusion on the ground. And that's good for the Ukrainians as they prepare for their counterattack.
And there's no question at all Vladimir Putin is very much interfering in those tactics, and of course is quite clearly not a military tactician. I think we can safely say. And again, you're in those sort of Potemkin territory of he seems to think he's got a military that has capability that it simply does not. But again, that said, there'll be a lot of people who I'm sure will be saying, well, hold on a minute, we can't trust everything you hear out of Ukraine either. And there'll be false flags there. They've run a fantastic propaganda war as well. There's no doubt at all about that. So a lot of we know the first casualty of war is always the truth. So we shall wait and see what happens. But can I ask you about these? It's May. Spring offensive. It's going to be summer fairly soon. Well, we hope so. Bring on the global warming and all that. But we've talked for so long about this upcoming Russian spring offensive and a counter-offensive from the Ukrainians. Where is any sign of this, and what is holding it back? Is it the weather? Is it equipment delays? What's going on?
There's lots of signs that the Russians launched their supposed counteroffensive as the ground was still frozen in February, and it petered out. It's culminated, and the ground has turned into a quagmire. The Ukrainians were waiting to get their troops back from training in the West, to get all the Western equipment in place, to get that into the new formations and practice their new formations. And there's no point in them attacking whenever the Ukrainian mud sticks tanks to the ground better than the best superglue that you can buy. And therefore they have to wait for the ground to harden up so that they can carry out armoured manoeuvre across the fields and open territories instead of being stuck to roads which are easy to defend. So the Ukrainians would never be in a position to counterattack before that ground's getting more solid, and that's beginning to happen. But I think we're still a few weeks off. However, there are mysterious explosions happening in Russian oil depots and all the rest of it inside Russia. So I don't think President Zelensky is completely accurate when he says he doesn't attack inside Russian territory, because someone's doing it, and that is preparing the damage against Russian logistics before there'd been a Ukrainian counterattack, which will keep the Russians fixed in position for many cases. So we'll see more of this in the coming days and potentially weeks. And I think we're only a few weeks off the Ukrainians launching their counterattack. I don't suspect days, but I suspect within a couple of weeks.
That's interesting to hear. Can I ask you finally also, I mean, you're a military intelligence officer. There's no doubt at all military intelligence definitely comes into play when it comes to major events like the coronation, big set-piece events that, very much a big open opportunity for anybody who wants to make a name for themselves or their cause. Fears of Islamist extremism, fears of eco-extremism. Let's call it what it is. It is extremism, but also anti-monarchy protesters. But I'm not entirely sure that someone holding up a sign or wearing a T-shirt or booing is quite the same threat, and we need to remember that in a democracy. But we're told that this is the biggest security operation ever. 11,500 police officers on the street. There is an awful lot more going on behind the scenes, isn't there? What we see in terms of police officers on the streets is nothing compared to plainclothes officers in the grounds in the surrounding areas, and of course there'll be snipers and goodness knows what on every roof. This is going to be a major operation. How big a threat is there of some sort of extremism, some sort of terror threat for a day like the coronation?
Oh, there's a massive threat, and there's such a wide range of threats as you've explained, and the dealing with those will have started weeks and weeks and weeks ago with the intelligence assessments of each threat and prioritising them and looking at the assets that are needed to try and counter them. And the one thing that we're very good at in the UK is making sure that the public can get as close to everything that's going on as possible, with the overt police presence being in their dress uniforms and all the rest of it, and some police officers in the crowd in their normal operational uniforms, but there'll be an awful lot of covert officers and people hidden from a security perspective, making sure that the threats are mitigated before they get anywhere close to what's going on, and allow the day to be a spectacular day. And this is something that the UK, we do very, very well indeed. You just have to compare that to the US president going from A to B, where he goes at 50, 60 miles an hour in a huge armoured convoy and nobody gets within 200 metres of him. We do this extremely well.
Indeed we do. Thank you so much, Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you for that.